Eclipse of Destiny. The return of the Eclipse of Destiny had become a spectacle. From the lowest pressure bulkhead corridors to the gilded balconies of the station's inner sancta, the people of Fiskbala gathered in their thousands, pressed against viewports, clinging to maintenance gantries, and crowding along void-facing walkways. The ancient forge station's hull groaned faintly as its artificial gravity compensated for the arrival of the mass. Beyond the armored plasteel, it came into view, a leviathan of metal, drifting at the end of a score of tow lines. The Eclipse was no vessel in the conventional sense, but a sprawling amalgam of wrecks and shattered hull plates, centuries, perhaps millennia of voidcraft welded together by accident, warp tide, and grim inevitability. Torn flanks wept glittering streams of atmosphere into the void. Its broken dorsal spires jutted like the ribs of a god's corpse. Some of its battered prows still bore the half-buried heraldry of long-dead imperial crusades. Others showed alien geometries never meant for human eyes. It had taken the bulk of the Navis Astra Wigathane's available tonnage to drag it through the warp, each frigate and battleship straining against the gravitational undertow of the Hulk's own mass shadow. Even now, with the final warp translation complete, the thing loomed over the Neatwortha system like a tomb world cast adrift among the stars. Archmagos Damia Voratrix stood in the observation gallery of Fiskbola's grand atrium, her mechadendrites curling and uncurling with the slow rhythm of a restless predator's tail. The viewport before her was an unbroken cathedral wall of reinforced plasteel, granting a panoramic view of the void. "I see it," she said flatly, optics whirring as she adjusted focus. Battered, powerless, a derelict stitched together from the bones of dead fleets. Beside her, Magos Ductora Cogitatus Tiberius leaned on the railing, helm tilted slightly in wry contemplation. "That's a big ship," he observed, vox filters distorting the words into a basso growl. Voratrix gave a noise that was half snort, half binary click. "It's a scrap heap, Cogitatus, a floating junkyard." She turned her head fractionally towards him, photoreceptors narrowing. "Is Bjornwolf planning to strip it for resources, or simply tether it here until it rots?" With a flick of his Auspex wand, Tiberius conjured a hololithic projection in the air between them. The vast image of the Hulk rotated slowly, its battered hull limned in red runes of hazard warning. "No," Tiberius said. "He intends to rededicate it to Imperial service." Voratrix's expression, or what could be read through the shifting plates of her augmetic face, was one of mechanical distaste. She touched a finger to her temple. "I should have ignored that little urchin the day we first met." Tiberius gave a dry chuckle. "You wanted this, Una. You can't invite a warg into your laboratory and then complain when it chews the furniture." Voratrix's optical lenses narrowed to slits. "Is it even secure? You know the stories about space hulks." "Oh, I know them well," Tiberius replied. "I dispatched a boarding contingent before we broke translation. Garrison stations are already active aboard, and as each section is devoided, we will send in the wargs to sweep it clean." At the mention of his bonded cyber wolves, a deep-chested whine rose from the deck beside him. Wirkung, plated in ceramite barding and marked with the machine sigils of Tiberius's forge kennel, twitched his ears and flicked his tail. Tiberius reached down to pat the creature's neck cabling. "Your brothers Demung and Thenkung are already aboard, hunting." He glanced at Voratrix. "Wirkung stays with me. Last time he tangled with a half-dozen Drakari, he came back with a new augmetic leg." "Lovely," Voratrix muttered. "And besides," Tiberius continued, "Captain Hyorowolf will be taking his recruits aboard for live training. The 7th Void Company are already deep in its spine." Voratrix's vox emitters gave a faint sigh, overlaid with a clipped burst of Binharic. Part prayer, part curse. "It is a strategic folly to bring that carcass here. We lack the dry docks to cradle it, let alone the capacity to rearm it." "I agree," Tiberius said. "And worse, we cannot simply replicate its armaments. I've already transmitted to Mars, hoping some ancient forge rite still possesses the pattern archives. These weapons are relics even by Mechanicum reckoning. Their origins predate the heresy, yet they are oddly crude for their era. The yards at Calter report they have nothing remotely comparable." The two magi fell silent. Beyond the viewport, the Eclipse of Destiny drifted into the embrace of Neatwortha's orbital anchor chain, its mass blotting out the stars like an eclipse indeed. Somewhere deep inside, uncounted shadows still moved, and the ghost light of the warp clung to its wounds. Wurkung gave another low whine, and this time neither Magos sought to comfort him. From the direction of the private docking gantry came the tap-tap of metal boots on ferrocrete, the sound rapid and purposeful. It was accompanied by an offensively cheerful hum, a staccato hymn to the motive force, rendered so jauntily it bordered on heresy to the ear of any devout tech priest. A second set of steps followed, slower, measured, altogether less enthused. Archmagos Voratrix and Magos Tiberius turned to see the source. Calculus Logifexian bounded up the steps 2 at a time, servo skulls whirring in frantic pursuit as they struggled to match his erratic movements. He was laden with scrolls in one bionic hand, while his mechadendrites cradled an armada of data slates, cogitators, and half-disassembled logic engines. As he ascended, documents, brass-bound cogitator keys, and parchment cylinders clattered onto the deck in his wake like votive offerings to the Omnissiah. "I have," Fexian declared breathlessly, dumping his burden onto the nearest table in a tidal wave of ink, brass, and sacred wax seals, made an initial start on the requisition forms, but I simply do not have the cogitator capacity to process all the data. He was already rifling through the pile as he continued, barely pausing for air. I'm thinking of bringing up my own arrays from the Great Forge, assuming I can find a spare shuttle. Tiberius sighed and offered Voratrix a wordless look of apology. He had personally hauled Fexin away from the Great Forge weeks earlier to begin surveying the hulk, and now the man seemed positively exhilarated in his new role, an emotion Voratrix considered wholly inappropriate for the matter at hand. From behind, Engineer Auspex Adept Carson Volks appeared, bending to collect the fallen scrolls. He gave the 2 senior magi a courteous wave, inhaled to speak, and was promptly drowned out as Fexian barreled on. "Initially we'll require 12 arc reactors, no, 18 to be safe, supplemental to the grand reactors, which will have to be replaced in their entirety, save for 2 that might be salvageable with extensive sanctification rites." He trailed off into a babble of Bin Harik while dragging out another parchment. "And that's merely power generation. I spoke with runesmith Osric. He suggests diverting a few of the larger ice comets from the system's rim." Tiberius cocked an optic. "Why?" Fexian didn't look up. "The ocean, of course. Now, where's the Nova chart?" Carson Volks took the opportunity to step in, posture snapping to parade ground precision. "The Hulk's hull integrity is currently estimated at 22%. She is on the verge of structural bifurcation." "Control section's a write-off," Fexian said over him. "Someone vented the manifold galleries and then flooded the entire conduit vault. Which is good, mind you. It means we can lay fresh bundles during system restoration." The primary weapon, Volks pressed on, was a Luna-pattern Nova cannon, entirely ruined. The barrel currently has a light cruiser embedded in it. Spaced reactors by region will resolve that," Fexian muttered. "Oh, we found 12 webway gates. They can go in Osric's vault with the others. He's got quite the collection." Volks grimaced but refused to yield. "Forward docking bay has been converted into a hab city of unknown origin. Aft docking bay contains an embedded frigate. Third lance turret and adjacent compartments are occupied by a primitive orc warband, bows and arrows mostly, currently being purged by Brother Beorthelm. All starboard macro cannon decks are beyond repair. Deck 13 is missing entirely. And there is a fungus infestation on 3 decks that consumed 3 of my Scutari. Landing the Hulk will be the real challenge," Fexian interjected blithely. "We'll need to cut a channel wide enough for—" "Enough!" Tiberius's voice cracked like a thunderclap, vox grills rattling. Wurkung lifted his great augmetic head from the deck, teeth bared in a silent snarl. The lupine's optics burned red, casting a hellish light over the smaller adepts. Both Fexian and Volks fell silent. "What precisely is this vessel's antecedents? This relic?" Voratrix's voice was clipped, the Binheric undertones of her speech carrying the faint crackle of impatience. Engineer Auspex Adept Carson Volks inclined his head. "The Obscurum Fati, or in Low Gothic, the Eclipse of Destiny. According to technoarchaeologist Vane Kelev, who is already aboard in search of relics, the vessel's keel was first laid 92 years before the dawn of the Great Crusade, under the designation Apocalypse-class battleship. Records state it was completed 58 years after the Emperor set sail. Tiberius's mechadendrites twitched. And how did it end up as a space hulk? Calculus Logifexian answered without looking up from his slate, words tumbling fast. Sparse records. Its first confirmed engagement, the Sedna campaign of Ada-3 and 30, under Captain Valentus, fighting to liberate the outer Sol system from warp-cursed Xenos. It served as auxiliary command ship for the Raven Guard. A century later, it reappears at Ullanor in the gun line against the Orc Empire, after which the War Master was appointed. At the name, Tiberius and Volks exchanged uneasy glances. Voratrix dismissed it with a sharp shake of her head. After that, Fexian continued, Imperial records disintegrate. The heresy's chaos shatters the trail. At some point the Eclypse was lost, missing in action, yet curiously still listed in service to the Imperium. Tiberius moved to the table, scattering servo-skulls in his wake. As head of security for Nitwertha and Fiskbala, I oppose the chapter master's order to bring this wreck here. He steepled augmetic fingers. That said, if restored to operational condition, its strategic value is undeniable. I question only whether it lies within our means. Sending it to Calth or even Mars would be wiser. It would fall apart in transit, Volks replied flatly. Agreed, Fexian chimed in. I have run the projections. With all our resources committed, repair is possible. Fiskbala can dock 3 cruiser-class hulls at once. This is larger, yes, but structurally similar. It would mean other Navis Astra Wigathane vessels subsisting on basic maintenance for the duration. Voratrix's gaze sharpened. And Battlefleet Revenantis? The Void Revenants take precedence over a vanity project. She gestured at the hulk beyond the viewport, its mass blotting out the stars. Flotward Edric has already sanctioned the work, Fexian said. With the Atensip lost, the chapter fleet stands at 9 ships. The Obscurum Fati would restore full strength. Tiberius regarded Volks. All things considered, can it be done? A grudging shrug. Possible, the adept admitted. Tiberius's optics narrowed. At the minimum, what is required to bring the Eclypse to readiness? Fexian shuffled parchments until he found one covered in itemized lists. He passed it to a hovering servo-skull which ferried it to Tiberius. The Magos scanned it, his lips tightening at the magnitude, then transmitted the data directly to Voratrix's cranial cogitators. Voratrix took several moments to process. 4 lance batteries, each with twin barrels, one with 4. As laid down during the Crusade, Fexian confirmed. Edric suggests, with additional reactors and rerouted motive force channels, we could field 2 quad mounts and 2 twin. Voratrix's eyes glowed faintly. Such drain would cripple sustained operations, suitable only for hit and run. Ah, Fexian countered. Osric anticipated that. Lances and void shields powered directly from the Nova Cannon's reactors. You said the Nova Cannon was ruined, Fexian grinned. That one is, but Osric recovered the second Sigjabield pattern piece from Geofon Break Station. Tiberius cut in. We had planned to mount it on Fiskbala, but could never feed it enough motive force. Volk spoke up reluctantly. Osric believes the Eclipse's dual reactor system, aft and subdorsal, is unique. In fact, Kalev suggests the flawed original motive force integration may be why she was lost. With the systems separated, both could run in parallel, with only negligible drain to secondary armaments when the Nova fires. Voratrix considered. Macro cannons, standard Apocalypse loadout, 12 heavy and 6 light per broadside, the latter dual purpose for bombardment and anti-fighter. Are they replaceable? Grimness still produces both patterns, Volk said. For Sarathar's fleet. Voratrix winced. Another negotiation with Archmagos Sensarax Centauri loomed. Torpedo tubes? Identical pattern to our own, Tiberius replied. Replace the blast doors, install new servitor cogitators. Voratrix thought for a moment. Bjornwolf intends to use it as a battle barge. Can its hangars be configured for Thunderhawks, Storm Eagles, and assorted drop pods? Fexian shrugged. They are gutted. We can build to any specification the Revenants require. Tiberius saw her hesitation fading, the same gleam of avarice for lost technologies he felt himself. Even Volks's reserve was eroding. The Eclipse was a prize beyond gold, a fragment of the Omnissiah's own handwork, a relic to be reforged. None of them would confess the thrill outright. The lances remain the greatest obstacle, Tiberius said. I'll have one removed, blessed for 7 days, then sent to Mars for the Lex Mechanica to copy the pattern. No. Voratrix's voice was final. Mars will never return it. Incaloris has a lance foundry. They've built multi-turret motive force manifolds for their dung beetle carriers. Archmagos Pyrovox owes Bjornwolf a favor. Tiberius permitted himself the faintest smile. Voratrix's optics flickered faintly as she processed the last point about Incaloris. It seemed to have lifted her mood. She gave a reluctant nod, folded her augmetic arms across her crimson robes, and fixed Phyxian with a suspicious stare. Very well. Now, what is this I hear about capturing ice rocks and landing? Phyxian's grin returned, his mechadendrites curling with enthusiasm. He rubbed his augmetic palms together as if unveiling some grand secret. Well, the ice is Runesmith Torhern's idea, about the sea, but the landing, that was Osric's. Voratrix waited in silence. The grin faltered. Osric, Phyxian said more hesitantly, believes we should land the Hulk on Nithelm, and while she's down, we could strip the remains of Shadowhelm for raw metal to rebuild the hull. Voratrix slowly placed one clawed hand against the side of her head, as though trying to physically prevent her brain from leaking out of her cranial vault. How? And why? Volx raised a hand in mild solidarity. I've already informed them it is impossible to land a vessel of this tonnage. You can land a ship this size, Tiberius rumbled. We just call it crashing. No, Phyxian said earnestly. It's perfectly viable. Nithelm's gravity well is shallow. Edric believes we can lower her down in a controlled descent. Once there, we can, refit her in situ. As for the water, flooding the surface again, well, that's Torhern's part. He suggests refilling one of the ancient basins, perhaps even restoring a small sea, depending on how far you wish to go. Voratrix turned to Volx, her expression a cold rictus of logic at war with disbelief. If that is even possible? Volx's servo-augmented shoulders rose in the slowest, most reluctant shrug imaginable. Possible. In the same way, it is possible to survive removing one's own lungs if one has a vat of spares on hand and an exceptional tolerance for agony. Voratrix's mind was already cataloging the logistical impossibilities, the strain on motive force arrays, the tidal stresses, the sheer mass displacement, yet somewhere beneath the cold logic of her noospheric augurs, there was a traitorous spark of curiosity. It was not the plan's sense that intrigued her, but its audacity. The Mechanicus revered innovation only when bolted to the frame of ancient dogma, and here was a challenge that reeked of both. A 5,000-year-old battleship, dropped onto a moon like some primitive spear into the hide of a beast, reforged in the open air under the gaze of Nithelm's dead seas. It was the kind of impossible act that would be whispered about in forge archives for centuries. She exhaled a sharp burst of Binheric static, part sigh, part encrypted oath. Explain, she ordered. Volk stepped forward, his tone as flat as if he were describing how to replace a servo-skull's pict lens. We would begin by securing Nithelm's equatorial anchor stations, the gravlifts and magnotethers originally built for Sadahelm's ore haulers. Some remain operational. We'd then use the combined motive force of Fiskbala's tow ships, plus the orbital counterweight rigs from the Great Forge, to bleed the Hulk's orbital velocity over a span of weeks. He sketched the motions with one augmetic hand, the gesture like a steel bird folding its wings. Once velocity and altitude are sufficiently reduced, we synchronize the descent with Nithelm's apogee. The low gravity well means the mass will not tear itself apart, provided we reinforce structural weak points with prefabricated bracing before final descent. Voratrix's optics narrowed. And when it hits? It will not hit, Volk said, though his tone allowed no certainty. The surface bedrock under the chosen site would be auger bored and layered with macro-ram supports to act as a cradle. Atmospheric thruster barges, 6, possibly 8, will provide final deceleration. The keel will settle into the cradle. Then we lock the hull to the bedrock with adamantium anchors, connect motive force feeds from the planetary grid, and begin refit. Phyxian was already grinning again. And the water. We melt the captured ice and flood the basin around the site. We could even make the refit yards amphibious, all the coolant intakes you could want, Una. Voratrix almost allowed herself a smile. Almost. This is deranged, she said. And worse, I think I want to see you try. Phyxian leaned forward, clearly delighted to have an audience again. And of course, Once Nithelm has a tolerable atmosphere, our engine seers can work without void suits. That alone cuts the repair schedule by half. No more fogging optics, no more frozen manipulators, no more servitor drift harnesses getting tangled in hull girders. He was pacing now, mechadendrites gesturing like a squad of servo-servitors directing traffic. Better still, we can bring up laborers from Nitwortha's surface without void training. Haulers, riggers, welders, hull platers, all working under Mechanicus overseers without the cost and time of full vacuum indoctrination. That's thousands of hands, Una. Thousands. Voratrix's optics dimmed fractionally. Untrained hands. Untrained in void work, Phyrexian corrected, stabbing a finger into the air for emphasis. But give them an atmosphere, gravity they recognize, and you'll see them work twice as fast as any void-born. And if we restore oceans to the moon as Torhern proposes, he grinned again, as if unveiling some masterstroke, then it will require its own novice Wulmare Wigathine, a greenwater navy of ironclads, monitors, and gunboats, purpose-built to patrol the Nithelm basins. Those crews would be raised and trained under naval discipline, learning basic seamanship, gunnery, and engineering, a perfect training pool for the Battlefleet Revenantes as a whole. You'd have a constant stream of fresh recruits with waterborne and shipboard experience ready to be promoted to the void. Tiberius made a low noise in his throat, part interest, part disbelief, but he did not interrupt. Phyrexian pressed on, almost breathless. We make the moon into a shipyard and a naval academy. Every keel we lay down there serves the Omnissiah twice over, once in steel, once in men. And every soul trained on Nithelm will think of the Eclypse of Destiny as their cradle. Imagine the loyalty. Imagine the legacy. Voratrix's gaze shifted back to the viewport, to the black, broken mass hanging in the void. It was still madness, but now it was madness with momentum. Voratrix's gaze did not leave the viewport. And what of security measures, Tiberius? The Magos Ductora inclined his head, his vox casting the words in a deep, resonant burr. I will increase the garrison on Nithelm tenfold. Skitarii maniples from the Fiskballa reserves will form the outer cordon, with voidsman detachments on constant patrol. No vessel will come within 1,000 leagues without identification and clearance. Phyrexian, he turned to the calculus logi, who straightened instinctively, will have personal oversight of the project from the Mechanicus side. All fabrication schedules, all resource requisitions, all technical labor assignments will pass through his cogitators first. Phyrexian's grin widened as though the Omnissiah himself had just blessed him with a private benediction. As for myself, Tiberius continued, I will assume temporary command of the Great Forge. I will retool every assembly line, sanctify every macro press and plasma foundry, and strip every redundant project to feed this undertaking. Voratrix gave a slow nod, but said nothing. In the sealed vaults of her own mind, she was already assigning forge crews to Nithelm's surface. Master pattern smiths from Fiskballa's inner sanctum, heavy lifter cohorts from the ocean rigs, entire manufactoria relocated under her writ. She had not spoken agreement aloud, and would not yet, but the plan was already taking shape in her mind's noosphere. Her thoughts drifted unbidden to Beornwulf. The orphan she had found living in the gutters of a backward barbarian world, a wild-eyed whelp who spoke in the guttural dialect of his tribe and mistrusted every augmetic spark. She had tempered him in the crucible of the Imperium, molded him with her own hand. His methods remained unorthodox, vexing in their refusal to bow to Mechanicus rigidity. But this day, with this ancient warship delivered into her grasp, she was forced to admit she had chosen her champion well. A soft chime from the Vox console broke her reverie, an adept's voice filtered and formal. Archmagos, the battleship Astrum Dice, flagship of the manifold Dawn fleet, has entered high anchor. She carries Chapter Master Beornwulf Elfwine and a designated ambassador. Voratrix looked once more to the viewport. The blackened mass of the Eclypse of Destiny still hung in its chains beyond, but now a distant gleam of void light marked the Astrum Dice as she slid into position. A predator among scavengers. She wondered, with a faint curl of curiosity and wariness, where Beornwulf intended to take her next. Beyond the cathedral-high viewport, the void was alive with motion. The Eclypse of Destiny loomed vast and jagged, its broken flanks dragged inch by inch through the darkness by attendant ships. Great toe chains of adamantium glittered faintly in reflected starlight, their links thicker than the towers of a hive. Projected suspensor fields shimmered along the Hulk's underbelly, holding her fractured bones in place as though the Omnissiah's own hands bore her aloft. Lines of shuttles moved in orderly procession, vanishing into the wound-like docking bays and emerging again with their cargoes of debris, relics, and data cores. Here and there, immense luminaries flared to life across the hull, their stark beams tracing the pitted armor and gouged gun decks. It was an ancient thing. Gunmetal and black, its form a cathedral city adrift in the void, scarred by 5 millennia of war and warp. And now, from the darkness astern, came the Astrum Dais. Golden, adorned with the gilt and heraldry of the modern Imperium, her hull shone like a sun-born blade. She moved with predatory grace, every armor plate chased with purity seals and every weapon housing dressed in the regalia of the fleet. The contrast was staggering. Relic and warship, past and present, bound together in the cold silence between worlds. Then Voratrix's optics caught motion along the Eclypse's scorched dorsal plating. On one of the jagged armor ridges, a banner was being unfurled by power-armored figures. Someone, almost certainly Borthelm, was fixing it to the pitted hull, a skull over a field of ghost flame snapping in the void's breath. The mark of the Void Revenants. Voratrix's vox grills clicked in something like amusement. Perhaps a broken relic was exactly the kind of ship her chapter deserved. Bjorthelm stood in maglock boots upon the Eclypse's scorched dorsal armor, his boarding shield mag clamped to his back, the banner's haft gripped in one gauntleted hand. Around him, 5 Void Revenants of the 7th Company worked in silence, armor scorched and pitted from the Hulk's cleansing actions. The standard unfurled as they drove its adamantine spike into a rent between 2 shattered armor plates. The ghost flame field rippled faintly in the starlight, the skull at its heart glaring down upon the void. The black silk snapped in the imperceptible tug of the Hulk's own gravitic bleed, as though it too hungered for battle. Bjorthelm looked up. Out beyond the broken ridges of the Eclypse, the Astrum Dais glided into view, her golden flanks aglow with running lights, every line of her hull proud and purposeful. And there, tiny against the great ship's mass, stood Chapter Master Bjornwolf on her forward observation gallery, his cloak drifting in the ship's shield haze. Bjorthelm brought his fist to his chest in a crisp salute, his warriors following suit, power armor plates locking with the sound of iron ringing in a vault. On the golden warship, Bjornwolf raised his own hand in return. No words crossed the gulf between them. None were needed. In the cold silence, the banner of the Void Revenants claimed the Eclipse of Destiny as their own.